me introduce the speaker that you came to hear. I'm at a disadvantage because I'm sorry to say that Rabbi Nathaniel didn't give me a bio on the speaker. So now I don't know exactly how to appropriately introduce him, other than to say that this is not the first time that Rabbi Landis has spoken here in the shul, but every time that he does speak here in the shul, it is Nachas time for my wife and myself, and we never miss this opportunity, and especially when he does what he does now, which is not only did he come, he brought the whole family in, so you can see now me and the kids, everyone, which is really, really wonderful. And having Rabbi Landis here to speak about whatever he would like to speak about would be wonderful. Especially, though, the topic that he's going to be speaking about tonight, because he has really undertaken a project, and that project is, we all know, that the Jewish people are getting their faces stepped on in the media. And what are we doing about it? It seems to be we can't figure out what to do about it, how to do about it. We know that our cause is so just, and yet no one seems to hear it, no one seems to get it. So defending Israel is a really, really big issue now. And the way to do it, of course, is through the media, through social media, and that is a project that Rabbi Landis has taken on, and he's going to share his ideas with us tonight, as he does with the larger world. And hopefully, he'll turn us into agents, and we can turn around and do the same for others and others and others. So without any further ado, Rabbi Pinchas Landis.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Friedman, for that wonderful introduction. It's always a true pleasure to come home to Dunwoody. They always talk about the home field advantage. So every time I have the opportunity to speak here, it's nice and easy. It's all family, especially a night like tonight where most of you were actually invited by my father to be here. So, truly friends and family. And thank you very much. Thank you, Rabbi Friedman, Rebbetzin Friedman. Thank you to Rabbi Nathaniel and his family. Nathaniel is one of my dear, dear friends. And every year he puts on a wonderful conference for rabbis from across North America, and the conference was yesterday. So he's very talented at getting people there. And he calls me up and said, "Hey, Pinchas, you want to do a book launch event for your book?" I said, "I'd love to." He goes, "Great. Come the day after Makaravim Day. You can stay for the conference too." Beautiful. So he got me, 2 for 1. So thank you for that. Thank you to Rabbi Nathaniel. Thank you to Rabbi Silverman and everything, the wonderful work of the Atlanta Scholars Kollel. Because in truth, as many of you know, I wrote a book. I'm sure you've heard about it. Many of you purchased it either tonight or before tonight. I apologize for those of you who came tonight expecting to purchase it, and Baruch Hashem, we sold out. But if you did not get a chance to purchase it here, you can take out your phone, go to rabbilandis.com, purchase it there. I will sign it and send it to you straight to your home. Don't worry about paying for the shipping. Just put local pickup, and I'll send it to your home. And those of you who want to do that, I'll wait. You can do it now, okay? No, please get the book. We'll sign it and we'll get it to you as soon as I get back to Cleveland. So, we have a situation for the Jewish people nowadays where it's very precarious. We all know it. All you have to do is take out your phone, look at your phone, and every day they're talking about the terrible atrocities that the Jewish people are perpetrating, or the response to the terrible things the Jewish people are doing in the land of Israel. And, it's an uncomfortable situation for all of us. And I'm sure we're all in a situation where we're trying to figure out what can we do in the present situation. Because let's face it, with the war in 2024, yes, it's going on very much in the battlefields in Gaza and, God forbid, in the north of Israel. But there's a war going on many, many, many fronts, as we're going to talk about. And one of the biggest places that this war is going on is, as Rabbi Friedman mentioned, in social media. And so therefore, we can't turn away from it. So I hope that tonight we can go through a few points and really a few ideas that all of us can have in our pockets ready to go when these issues come up. Now, I often get the question that with this whole situation right now, with the world and the way they're looking at Israel and the way that people are upset at Israel, and my wife and I spend most of our time now working on this concept of hasbara, of explaining for Israel, of answering for Israel, of defending the Jewish people against the anti-Semitic attacks. And the question I often get is, who is your audience? Like, who do you expect to affect with that? Do you expect that you're going to put out a video about how there was never such a thing as genocide in the land of Israel, and they're going to show it on the encampments in Harvard University, and they're going to say, oh, wow, Rabbi Landis said there wasn't genocide. Let's shut down and go home. Like, is that what we're expecting to do? Truth is, no. That's not why I think these discussions are important. These discussions, I believe, are important for ourselves and our children and our grandchildren. Because I believe most of the people in this room, I would go out on a limb to say that most of us have a positive feeling towards the land of Israel. Most of us, when we see the things coming across our news feed from CNN and CNBC and the like, which sound not right, most of us in our kishkas know there's something wrong with that. But I find that very few of us can answer the questions for ourselves. And that's very important. But what's even more important is for our children and our grandchildren, who also, I hope, have a positive view of the land of Israel, but for sure don't know how to answer these questions. So I always say that's our target audience as a Jewish people today. We've got to hit the middle. The people who know the history, know the details, know everything, they're okay. The people who don't know anything and don't care and go out saying ceasefire now and from the river to the sea, we're probably not going to ever get to them. But the important target audience for this discussion, I believe, is the middle. Those people in the middle. The people who feel passionate about the Jewish people, passionate about the land of Israel, but don't know how to answer the questions. You know, when we look at the situation, it can be scary. We turn on the news and we see these encampments on, I think it was all but 10 universities throughout the country, and we get scared. We think like, you know, this is the next generation. These are the people being educated by the universities and colleges, and what are we going to do about it? Now, the truth is with most of these people, they don't know the first thing about anything. You know, they're not educated. They did not read the books. They do not know anything about it. And you know, if you start to ask them the questions, they're like, really? Israel? I think I've heard of it. You know, the famous question that you ask these students is, when they say from the river to the sea, you ask them, which river and which sea? And they're like, oh, I don't know, the Chattahoochee and Lake Lanier? But, you know, that's really what we're up against. You know, I'm a teacher of mine back when I was in yeshiva. When they would try and educate you on going out to do Jewish outreach work, one of the things that they would tell you that people would often say to like rile up rabbis is that they'll come up to you and say, Rabbi, I'm an atheist. Right? You hear that sometimes. Rabbi, I'm an atheist. You know, an atheist means that I know there is no God. And a teacher of mine said there's a very easy way to approach this with people. You say to them, oh yeah, you're an atheist, so I guess you're very well versed in classical philosophy. I'm sure you've read Socrates, Aristotle, Plato. No. Maybe, you know, medieval philosophy, Thomas Aquinas. No. Modern philosophy, Spinoza, maybe. Who's that? Have you ever read the Bible from cover to cover? I saw a YouTube summary. And you say to the kid, you know, I'm sorry, you're not an atheist, you're an idiot. And that's the same approach to a lot of these kids on campus. They don't know the first thing. They saw 2 TikTok videos. They say, now I'm educated, now I'm going to an encampment. But that's what we're up against. That is the situation we have in the world today. So I think there's several points that we all have to keep in mind when it comes to interacting with these people. And like I said, more importantly, hitting the middle. Hitting those children who are friends with the people going to the encampments. They would never go to the encampment, but it's chiseling away at them. They need to know, well, how am I right? How do I know that I'm right? So the first point I believe that we all have to keep in mind is that the Jewish people never left the land of Israel. Okay? We have been in the land of Israel for 3,000 years without a break. Yes, I know we were all sold the Zionist dream that we came back after 2,000 years. Liot am chovshi be'artzeinu. You know, we were hoping for 2,000 years when we got back to the land of Israel. The problem is it's all a lie. It's not true. The Jewish people never left the land of Israel. And this is very important. In other words, when we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the State of Israel, we are playing into the narrative of the other side that we came here 75 years ago as white colonizers and took over this land and kicked out the indigenous Palestinians, and therefore we're just as bad as the British and all their colonization and the Dutch and all their colonization. We were just another part of the imperialistic history of Europeans trying to conquer different parts of Asia and Africa. So it's not true. We're not a people that left after 2,000 years and came back and have only been there for 75 years. Let me clarify. Avraham Avinu, our forefather Abraham, was promised the land of Israel in the year 1743 before the Common Era. That promise was solidified in 1313 before the Common Era when the Jews stood at Mount Sinai and were given the Torah. And the land was eventually conquered in 1273 BCE by Joshua and settled for the first time by Jews. So basically from 1273 BCE until today, there has been a Jewish presence in the land of Israel. We were there continuously from 1273 to 423 when the Babylonians came along to kick us out of the land. And then we came back 70 years later in 348 to rebuild the Second Commonwealth, which was eventually brought to its sovereign end in the year 70. Now that's a very important thing to keep in mind. It wasn't like when the Romans came along in the year 70 that they kicked every last Jew out of the land of Israel. No, they destroyed the temple, which was terrible. They took away the Jewish sovereignty, which was terrible. But you know what? The Jews remained the majority of the population in the land of Israel until the 4th century. So for the next 300 plus years after the destruction of the Second Temple, we were still sovereign there. We were just not independent. We were vassals to Rome, but we were still sovereign, and we still had the majority of our population living there in the land of Israel. Now, eventually in the 5th century, the Roman Empire is split into two at this point. We have the Byzantine Roman Empire, which has been influenced by the Christians, and they start to persecute the Jews in Israel with a vengeance, making it very uncomfortable for Jews to continue to live in the land of Israel. And so, for the first time, Jews finally start to leave the land of Israel, but they still remain a sizable minority throughout the whole country, and a majority in many places, especially in the north of the country. And that remains true until the Muslim conquest. When the Muslims come in the year 700 and kick out the Byzantines, the Jews are still a sizable population in the country. And not only, but even though the Muslims conquer the land of Israel in the 7th century, they do not become a majority in the country for another several hundred years. So basically, for the first 1,000 years after the temple is destroyed, we are still anywhere from a majority to a sizable minority in the land of Israel. Now, what happens over the next 1,000 years is you have a shifting amount of different Muslim conquerors. After the Crusaders, you have first the Mamelukes and the Ottomans, and both the Mamelukes and the Ottomans do a successful job of essentially completely destroying the land. Right? Completely making it unlivable. Who grew up planting a tree for Israel through JNF? You know why that was such a big deal when we were kids? Because when the modern state of Israel was built and the Jews went back to settle the land in the 20th century, the Turks, the Ottomans who had been there before, cut down every tree in the country. You know why the Hulda Swamp was a swamp? Because there were no trees left in the country. And they essentially destroyed the land, deforested the whole area, made it almost impossible to live in. And there's a famous article written by Mark Twain when he took a trip to the land of Israel, and he describes it as one of the most desolate places on God's green earth. So if you remember one point from this first part of our discussion, here it is. That in the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was the sick man of Europe. They were on bought time. Everyone thought that they were going to be wiped out in a matter of minutes and just fall apart from their own weight. It ended up taking about another 100 years, and it wouldn't be until the end of World War I that the Ottomans would cease to be an empire in the world. But at that point, when the Ottomans were in control, the last 100 years of Ottoman control of the land of Israel, before the British come in, there was a total of 100,000 to 250,000 people total living in the land of Israel. Now, at that time, there were already millions of Muslims in the world, right? There are hundreds of millions of Muslims in the world at that time, and there was less than 250,000 people living in the land of Israel. So what that means is at the time of modern Zionism, when Jews start coming back to the land of Israel en masse, there's very few people there. Now, there are some people there, and as many point out, the early Zionists kind of always fudged the Arab problem because they figured that, okay, there's only about 100, 250,000. They'll appreciate us building the land. They'll appreciate having a modern first world country. Again, terms first, second, third world didn't exist yet, but they'll appreciate everything we're going to bring to the country, and they'll just become a minority in the country we're going to build. But what happens is, as the early Zionists and the British start developing the land of Israel and making it a bright spot throughout the Middle East, you know what happens? Muslims start coming and the Arabs start coming for the opportunities that they can find in Palestine. Because it becomes much better to live in Palestine than to live in Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Iran, all the other places around the area. In fact, Lawrence of Arabia, the famous British general, W.T. Lawrence? Lawrence of Arabia. What was that? T.E. Lawrence, thank you. T.E. Lawrence. Lawrence of Arabia wrote that the Jews are doing a wonderful job of settling the land of Israel. We should learn from what they're doing throughout the whole Arab world, or the land of Palestine. So when the Jews start coming back en masse, that's really when the Arabs start to come back en masse as well. And they're coming for opportunities. They're coming for opportunities that were unmatched throughout the Arab world. And this is what ends up becoming the sticking point, because the Arabs end up coming back at a rate of 2-to-1 over the Jews, to the point where when we start with the idea of the State of Israel, we've got 500,000 Jews there, and we have basically 1 million Arabs. But that is how it happened. So this is a very important point when we talk about the Palestinians displacing their ancestral homeland, that we took what was theirs. We came essentially at the same time. Now, yes, you will meet Palestinians who were there for generations, but there were Jews who were there for generations as well. And that, I believe, is a very important point that we have to keep in mind. The number one, we never left the land. We were always there. We always had a presence there. Number two, for those of us who found our homes outside the land of Israel, we never stopped hoping to come back to the land of Israel. When we daven, we say 3 times a day, we say that may our eyes behold your return to Zion in mercy. We say when we bench, we say that we should rebuild the holy city soon in our days. At our Pesach Seder, we say every year, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, let us go back to Yerushalayim, because as a people, we never left the land of Israel. So I believe that's the first point we have to keep in mind, and we have to teach to our children and our grandchildren. The State of Israel was founded 75, 76 years ago. That's the modern State of Israel. But as a people, we never left the land of Israel. Now, there's something that we shouldn't be lost on us when we look at this situation. Rabbi David Gottlieb wrote a book called Living Up to the Truth. And in that book, he has a fascinating analysis of the different curses that are prophesied in the book of Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy tells essentially how the exile of the Jewish people is going to look. And he tells us that when we go into exile, the land of Israel will be destroyed and the Jewish people will be exiled. We're going to be conquered by people who speak an unknown language to us. We're going to be scattered all over the world. We're going to remain stateless. And in the end, we will return to the land of Israel. This is essentially a summary of several different parshios in the book of Deuteronomy. Rabbi Gottlieb, being the mathematician that he is, put a probability on these prophecies. That if we look at these prophecies and put a probability, he said, what's the likelihood, if we were standing at the time the Torah was written, that these prophecies would come true? Let's take them one by one. That the Jewish people would be destroyed and exiled from out their homeland. He said, okay, that happened to a lot of people. We'll give that a 1 in 10 probability. That we would be conquered by an unknown language. Okay, usually you're conquered by a neighbor. Usually another language, you give that a 1 in 4 probability. Scattered all over the world. Usually when you're conquered, you get eaten up by who you're conquered by. So we'll give it 1 in 10 probability. That you'll remain stateless the whole time that you are conquered. We'll give it a 1 in 4 probability. And the idea of returning to your ancestral homeland, he gave a 1 in 10 probability, even though he says that you cannot find an ancient people that was ever expelled from their homeland and came back. There's none of them, right? So he says if you add this all up, you get a 1 in 16,000 probability that the Jewish history would play out as it has been. Yet, we see it happen. We were kicked out of our homeland, we remained small in number, we remained stateless, we were scattered all over the world, and in the end, we see that the Jewish people are returning to the land of Israel. Now, beyond that, we also see that 3 times in our first 25 years, our neighbors in the land of Israel tried to destroy us, and then in the 50 years since that, the Palestinians within the land of Israel have tried to destroy us. And if that's not enough, we have the whole world constantly trying to decide that we don't deserve to exist. Anyone ever heard of the United Nations? You know, it's a true body where they love the Jewish people more than you can possibly imagine. Since the year 2015, the United Nations General Assembly has passed 154 resolutions calling out the state of Israel, criticizing the state of Israel. At the same time, they've passed 75 resolutions against the rest of the world. Now, this is at the same time we have everything going on in Syria and Iran. This is the same time where we have the Russia invasion of first the Crimea and then the Ukraine. And last year alone, there were 14 anti-Israel resolutions passed, and that compares to 7 criticizing the rest of the world. That was 2 against Russia, 1 against North Korea, 1 against Iran, 1 against Syria, and one against Myanmar, and 1 against the U.S. for their treatment of Cuba. Okay? The UN can do it all. So this is the situation we have in the world. We never left the land of Israel, and what we see happening is absolutely miraculous, all prophesied in our Torah. And that's very important for us all to keep in mind when we see the criticism that we are getting. Because this is our land. We never left it. The fact that we've returned en masse in the past 100 years is miraculous. And should never be lost on any of us as an idea that we should pass on constantly to our children. Okay, point number 2 that I believe is very important. And that is, why does the world care so much about the Palestinians? Why has this topic gotten so much attention worldwide for everyone looking on? So there's a couple different options. First of all, it could be because they're stateless. Maybe the world has such mercy on the Palestinians because they are a stateless nation. Well, it's interesting. Has anyone ever heard of the Encyclopedia of Stateless Nations? The Encyclopedia of Stateless Nations chronicles 350 stateless nations today, and this list is by no means exhaustive. These are just the list of nations that are actively seeking statehood. 350 in the world today. According to the United Nations, there are only 3% of the people in the world that have actually achieved statehood. Now, some of them are new, like the Palestinians. Some of them, we have the Kurds, we have the Juvians in Korea, we have the 1.3 Marjatines in Somalia, we have some that are small, we have some that are large, like the 23 million Ibos in Nigeria, the 11 million Baluchs in Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, and 6.5 million Tibetans in China, 70 million Tamales in southern India, and on and on and on. Why is the world not focused on all these people? Some of them are newly Palestinians, some of them are old. Many of them dwarf the Palestinians in number. Why are they so concerned about the Palestinians? Because you, like me, have probably not even heard of many of these other people, save the Tibetans, because they got the Dalai Lama. Hello, Dali. But, you know, no one's talking about the rest of these nations. So it can't be because the Palestinians are stateless. Must be because they're homeless. Must be because they're displaced from their home and the War of Independence. That must be what it is. That's why the whole world is focused on the Palestinians. But if that's the concern, what about the 2.5 million Afghans that were displaced in the Afghanistan war? Or the 1.5 million displaced in the Iraq wars? Or the 4 million Syrian refugees displaced in the Syrian war? Why is the world not focused on them? Yet they're focused on the Palestinians. So I believe when you start to add up the situation, you see that people being stateless is far from unique. People being displaced due to war is far from unique. Yet the world is focused on the Palestinians. Why is that? And then we go on, and we look at our good friends at the United Nations. Right? The United Nations. The United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees, UNHCR, has a definition of what we call a refugee. That definition is that someone who is driven from the country of their nationality due to well-founded fear of persecution. That's a refugee. Now, refugee status is only one generation. It does not pass on to your children. And once you become a citizen of another state, you are no longer a refugee. That is how the United Nations defines what a refugee is. For everyone else in the world except for the Palestinians. For the Palestinians, it's not enough to have the UNHCR. They had to develop a new organization for them called UNRWA, right? The United Nations Relief and Works Agency. How does UNRWA define a Palestinian refugee? A Palestinian refugee is anyone who was displaced by the 1948 war, who, by the way, lived in Israel for only 2 years beforehand. In other words, anyone who came in 1946 and was displaced in 1948 is a refugee. All of their male descendants are considered refugees by birth or adoption. And the refugees are still recognized as refugees even after they become citizens of new states. There are American citizens today who are counted by UNRWA as Palestinian refugees. At the time of the creation of UNRWA in 1950, there were 750,000 Palestinian refugees. Today, there are over 5 million. Now, here's a fascinating statistic. If you would apply the world's definition of refugee to the Palestinians, how many Palestinian refugees would you actually have today? 30,000. How many employees does UNRWA have today? 30,000. I think we see a problem here. And Thomas Friedman, the journalist, said that there's nothing wrong with criticizing the state of Israel. And, you know, every government deserves criticism when they do things that are wrong. But when you criticize one government in a way that you don't criticize anyone else, that's simply anti-Semitism. And when we look at the world's definition of the Palestinian refugee, there's no other explanation than anti-Semitism. And that's the second point we have to keep in mind. That the world has this special definition of what a refugee is by the Palestinians. And the world has dedicated millions and millions of dollars over the years through UNRWA to this one area, essentially starving and ignoring all the other refugees and stateless people in the world today. And I believe the only reason is because the people standing on the other side of those refugees have yarmulkes on their heads, tzitzis coming out of their shirt, and shaitels, and are Jewish people. That's the reason I believe that the world is so focused on the Palestinians. Point number 3. The Palestinians have been trying to uproot the Jewish state since its founding, the modern Jewish state since its founding in 1948. They, for the first 25 years, relied on their neighbors, relied on the other Arab countries, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and that was quite clear after 1967, even more clear after 1973, that that plan wasn't going to work. So, in 1964, they established the Palestine Liberation Organization. Now, mind you, the Palestine Liberation Organization was started when Jordan occupied what they called the West Bank, Egypt occupied Gaza, and Syria occupied the Golan Heights. So what exactly were they trying to liberate? Right? They were not trying to liberate the Golan Heights, West Bank, or Gaza. The Palestine Liberation Organization made it quite clear, they wanted to liberate the entirety of Palestine, and that was always their goal. And for years, they've tried many different ways to gain acceptance in the Western world. But this idea that they really started to carry on from the 60s up through the 90s in a massive way is their idea was to try and gain international acceptance through terrorist attacks. But they quickly realized that that wasn't working to gain them the popular hearts and minds of the Western world. So they came up with a much more insidious way to try and win over the hearts and minds of the future of our people here in the Western world. And that is the boycott, divest, and sanction movement. Who here has heard of BDS? I'm sure everybody has. The boycott, divest, and sanction movement is quite simple what they're trying to do. It says it on their website in plain English. They uphold the simple principle that Palestinians are entitled to the same rights as the rest of humanity. It presents itself as a grassroots, organic organization, a social justice movement, cloaks itself in all kinds of wonderful liberal woke language, and presents itself to the woke liberal world saying, take on our social justice cause, look at these social justice atrocities, please come and be part of this, and help us with the Palestinian people. Because what do they want to do? They want to end international support for Israel's oppression of Palestine and pressure Israel to comply with international law. Sounds wonderful, right? Sounds wonderful to your unknowing student on the college campus that all they're trying to do is bring justice for the Palestinians, bring justice with the violation of international law. That's all they want to do. But all you have to do is scratch under the surface and see what they're actually trying to do. The founder of the BDS movement is a man by the name of Omar Barghouti. He's a Palestinian Arab born in Israel, and he actually holds both an undergraduate degree and a PhD from Tel Aviv University. But there's apartheid and all that stuff. Now, you can find videos online. It's very easy to see how he really feels about what BDS is doing. And I quote, "No rational Palestinian would ever accept a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. I am completely and categorically against binationalism because it assumes that there are two nations with equal moral claims to the land." That does not sound like social justice for the Palestinians. That sounds like we are trying to uproot and undo the state of Israel, because that is their goal. Nowhere on the BDS website do they put forth an idea for peace. Nowhere do they put forth any ideas of coexistence, because that is not what they want. They want to make sure that the land of Israel as a state cease to exist and will once again be occupied by Muslims. That is their goal. And in case you think it's not, allow me to share with you a very interesting fact. In 2016, the former U.S. Treasury terrorism analyst, whose name is Jonathan Schanzer, testified before Congress about the ties between the BDS movement and Hamas. Now, he's an expert in uncovering and unraveling financial setups that are meant to remain hidden. People who want to try and hide things, he's an expert in trying to unhide those facts. And he stated in his testimony, at least 7 individuals who work for or on behalf of the American Muslims for Palestine, that is the foundation that backs the BDS movement here in America, have worked for or on behalf of organizations previously shut down or held civilly liable in the United States for providing financial support of Hamas. Now, his testimony is dense and hard to read, but I encourage, if you have the time, to sit there and read it. He essentially shows unequivocally that the same people who are funding the BDS movement are the same exact people who are funding Hamas. So, in short, Hamas is the military wing, the BDS movement is the political wing. And that is a very important point to these unknown college students who sit there saying, BDS, BDS, free Palestine, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I think if you would sit them down, maybe before October 7th, maybe the landscape's changed a little bit, unfortunately, but you'd sit them down and say, you know that you are being influenced by the same exact money that blows up Jewish buses in the land of Israel and rapes women and does all these terrible terroristic atrocities. The same people that are funding that are funding what you are doing right now. Yet they wrap it up in such an unknown, woke, social justice way that no one could be the wiser that they are all being made out to be a bunch of useful idiots in the war against the Jewish people. And that's point number 3. So I believe the 3 most important points that we should keep in mind when talking about the situation in the land of Israel is that, number 1, we never left. We never left. We were forced out in number, we always remained there, at least as a minority, and even as we were forced out, we always tried to get back. We made many attempts throughout history. Point number 2, why in the world is the world so focused on the Palestinians? The only logical explanation is that there are Jews on the other side. And that number 3, this movement that is getting so much traction with our youth here in America is nothing short of the PR wing of Hamas. 3 very important points for a I think, for us all to keep in mind. But we want to close with just one idea. I don't want to belittle the scary times that we are living in. It is scary to be a Jew here in America, and it is not easy. And frankly, sometimes we can feel helpless, because any way you cut it, there are 1 billion Muslims in this world, and there are maybe 15 million Jews. So, they round off to more than we are. And somehow we're supposed to win this PR battle. We're supposed to win on the college campus. We're supposed to be able to stand up for ourselves. How in the world are we supposed to do it? And when we look at things like October 7th and the aftermath, where they were protesting in support of Hamas before the IDF dropped one bomb in Gaza, we look at this and we feel helpless. And we say, first of all, how could this be? And second of all, we should all ask ourselves, what can we do? What can we really do to impact the situation? Because yes, I believe knowing the history and knowing the facts is extremely important. And anyone who wants to read more on this topic, you can get my book, which is available for $24.99 at rabbilandis.com. Or there's many other great books you can get to be knowing of our history. But there's an idea that is brought down by Rashi and Chumash. Rashi, after the Jews cross the sea and are attacked by the arch enemy of the Jewish people, Amalek, tries to explain how this could happen. How could you have a situation where you have the Jews just went through this amazing experience of the exodus from Egypt, the splitting of the sea, walking through, seeing the Egyptians annihilated in one foul wave and taken out for being a problem and a nemesis anymore to the Jewish people? How could they turn around to be attacked by this nation of Amalek? What exactly was going on over there? So Rashi explains that what was going on was, we see what is the first thing that the Jews do after they cross the sea? They do that one thing that Jews throughout history do better than anyone else. They start kvetching. Right? They start kvetching. Where's the water? Where's the food? What are we going to do? How are we going to survive? They start, these are the people who just walked through the sea split, just got the 10 plagues over the course of the past year, and they don't think God's going to take care of them, yet they start kvetching. And the next thing that happens is Amalek attacks. And Rashi says that he explains through a parable what exactly is going on over here. He says you have a young boy who's riding on his father's shoulders. And the young boy says to his father, "Hey, Dad, can you give me that thing over there? Hey, Dad, can you do this thing for me over there?" And then a little while later, the boy starts saying, "Hey, has anyone seen my dad lately? I haven't seen my dad." And the dad looks up and says, "What do you mean? I'm the one down here doing all these things for you." And he takes the boy off his shoulders, puts him down on the ground, and the boy gets bit by a dog. The idea is that we live in a very scary world. The world was set up with a balance between good and evil, and if you want to delve deeper into the Kabbalistic ideas as to why that is, call up Rabbi Natanel and tell him you want to learn Derech Hashem or Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, and you'll find all the answers. But that's how the world was created, with good and evil. And the Almighty constantly protects us from evil at all times. And sometimes we're aware of that, and sometimes we're not aware of that. Just like as children. Sometimes we're aware of the tremendous good that our parents do for us, and sometimes we're not. And when we become unaware, and when we become distant from our families, all that our parents want is one simple thing: connection. They want us to remember that we're there for them. They want us to remember that we're a part of their lives and how we've taken care of them all these years. And frankly, I believe that's all the Almighty wants from us in this time. Yes, He wants us to do the hasbara, to get involved with the social media war. That's all important. But in the end, ultimately, I believe when these tragedies happen, somehow we've not merited to have the protection from Him, and therefore we have to do our part to say, no, we're still here and we appreciate everything that you've done for us. The IDF is our physical army living in the land of Israel, but every single Jew can be part of the spiritual army. So as we open up our cell phones and look at the atrocities that are being put through on social media and on the news networks as to how terrible the Jewish people are and the rise in anti-Semitism, etc., yeah, we should feel really bad about it and we should get upset about it. But what I would encourage every single person to do is, instead of just getting upset, is to take positive action. Look at the situation and say, you know what? This is the Almighty saying, hey, you don't see what I do for you? Let me just pull back the curtain for 1 minute and you'll see how ugly and scary this world can be. And we can become despondent. You can look at it and say, who am I? Like, what difference is it really going to make if I change that somehow that's going to affect what's going on in Gaza or on the northern border of the land of Israel? What's that going to have to do with anything? So I want to share with you a story to close with. A story about a guy, we'll call him John to protect the innocent. And John had a Rebbe that he was very close to. And this Rebbe got COVID at the beginning of the COVID pandemic in New York when no one knew what they were doing, and they were intubating people immediately. And the rabbi became very, very, very sick. So much so that on Erev Pesach, they called the Rebbetzin of this particular rabbi and said, you have to come say goodbye, your husband's not going to make it. And this student of the rabbi was very upset because he was extremely close with this rabbi. And he knew that without this rabbi in his life, he wasn't sure how he'd have the guidance to the situation. Yet, like, what could he do sitting there under COVID lockdown? What could he do to really help out his rabbi? So this guy, we're calling him John, was the kind of guy who, he davened 3 times a day, davened with a minyan, but didn't always take his davening so seriously. If davening started at 7 in the morning, he'd show up at 7:05, throw on his talis and tefillin, quickly speed through davening, and go about his workday. Wasn't something he took seriously. So he looked at the situation with his rabbi, and he said, you know what? I got to do something. I'm going to start focusing on my prayers in a more meaningful way. Couldn't go to shul because it was the middle of the COVID lockdown. But he said, I'm going to start really focusing on my davening. I'm going to take the extra time. I don't have to run off to work. I don't have to keep up with the minyan. It doesn't matter what time I start. I can end any time I want. I'm going to really start focusing on what I'm doing. And that person went from being someone who just showed up to davening, sped through, went through the motions, to really taking his davening extremely serious. And he started adding on more and more to his prayers. He started saying the daily psalms. He started saying the what we call the korbanos that come at the beginning of davening. And he totally, in the short period of time, revolutionized the way that he prayed to Hashem on a daily basis. Lo and behold, after Pesach, he got word that his teacher didn't pass away. His rabbi had made a turn, and all of a sudden was starting to improve. And a month after that day, when his wife was told to come say goodbye to her husband, he got up and walked out of the hospital. Now, the rabbi's name is Rav Chaim Zev Ginsburg, a rabbi in New York, and I know this story very well because it happened to me. I felt helpless. What am I going to do to help Rabbi Ginsburg, who I was so close with? But I said, what can I do? I'm going to change the way that I daven. And when Rabbi Ginsburg left the hospital, there was an askin, a person involved from his community, who was there helping him pack up in the hospital. And the head of the department came in, a non-Jewish doctor came in and said, you need to go back and tell your community that they shouldn't ever undervalue the power of their prayer, because the fact that this rabbi is walking out of this hospital is nothing short of miraculous. We all have that ability. That ability to look at a difficult situation where we feel absolutely helpless. We feel like there's nothing we can do. We're not going to go and volunteer for the IDF. Heck, if I volunteered, they'd reject me in a second. But we can start praying. If we never say the Shema, we can start saying the Shema. If we never light Shabbos candles, we can light Shabbos candles. If we never put on tefillin, we can put on tefillin and we can say, Hashem, I'm doing this because I realize that I am on your shoulders. I realize that the only way we ever survive in this world is because of you. Get us out of this situation. I know you're our Father. I know you're carrying us. And if each and every single one of us do that as an individual, we find that one thing to do, that one thing to develop a closeness, a closer relationship between us and the Almighty, and the collective of the Jewish people will do that, there will be no way in heaven that Hamas, Hezbollah, or Iran can ever defeat us. Thank you very much.